I'm John Lanius. Welcome to The Room. The Room gives you access to Geniecast top thought leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, business coaches, sports celebrities, and much more. Our guests will share ideas and concepts that you may use to better your organization and propel your teams. Our guest today is Josh Linkner. Josh is a creative troublemaker. He passionately believes that all human beings have incredible creative capacity, and he's on a mission to unlock inventive thinking. Josh has been the founder and CEO of 5 tech companies, which have sold for a combined value of over $200 million, and is the author of 4 books, including the New York Times bestsellers, Disciplined Dreaming and The Road to Reinvention. Josh is also a passionate Detroiter, the father of 4. He's a professional level jazz guitarist and has a slightly odd obsession for greasy pizza. Hi, Josh, how are you? And what is this obsession with greasy pizza?
Hey, John, great to be with you. And, I think we all love pizza, but I have like this weird compulsion with it. I like thick pizzas, thin pizzas, but of course the best one, Detroit style pizza. It's like half the thickness of a Chicago deep dish. The cheese goes all the way to the edges. The tomato sauce is on top. Can't beat it. Highly recommend it.
All right. Well, I'm curious if there's ever been a fight between Detroit pizza and Chicago pizza, or are you planning to have one?
Well, if there's ever a fight between the two, clearly Detroit pizza would win by a long shot. That being said, we in Chicago have been head-to-head in many cases, and regrettably, many cases they've won sports rivalries and such. But I hope we can win it from the pizza standpoint. And by the way, John, I just want to compliment you on your outfit. I mean, clearly your fashion consultant is brilliant. In fact, I just really admire that whole outfit. Well constructed.
Well, this is how you know that we're essentially live, because if we would have known that, we wouldn't have gone to the same party together. You know what I mean? All right. Well, let's move from pizza to music. So how does a professional jazz guitarist become a 5-time tech entrepreneur?
So I've been playing jazz guitar now for over 40 years, believe it or not. And I'm very passionate about the art form. It's, you're basically improvising as you go. So it's rather dangerous and you're taking these responsible risks along the way. And it's funny, when I started learning about business, I realized there are so many parallels. And when I started my first company at age 20, I'd never taken a business class. But I think jazz is a wonderful metaphor in that you're taking responsible risks. You're course correcting in real time. You're sometimes in a listening role and supporting others, and other times shining in a solo type role. And you have to navigate through complex challenges. You have to bounce back when things go awry. And these are the exact skills I think that are so important today as the complexity of the world continues to expand and as business leaders continue to look for that extra edge.
So what I captured in a lot of that was really the beauty of improvisation. And so when you talk about other transferable skills, going from being a musician to being a founder or CEO, what are some of those other skills?
Well, one of them is a willingness to kind of push the creative boundaries, knowing full well you might screw something up. It's funny, people ask me all the time, when you're going to play a jazz gig in front of a discerning audience, how do you know you're going to play it all right? And the answer, the surprising answer perhaps, is I know for sure I'm not going to play it right. I'm surely 100% going to screw something up because I've never played a gig without doing that, nor have most jazz musicians. So the beauty of creative confidence is not knowing that we're going to get it right. It's knowing that you're going to screw something up and having the confidence to course correct and adapt. And I think that's exactly what we need to do in the business world. If the optimal number of failed experiments, for example, in an innovative company is not 0. In fact, if it's 0, that means you're playing it too safe. So it's rather about pushing the creative boundaries, knowing full well that you may stumble, and then you're going to be able to learn and course correct along the way.
So I love what you're saying there, knowing that you're going to mess something up. I mean, for me, what I heard in that is really about giving your teams or even yourself permission to fail and the beauty of that. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really can. So one of the neat things, I don't think that jazz musicians are more creative than the next person biologically. And by the way, the research is crystal clear that all of us as human beings have enormous reservoirs of creative capacity. But I would suggest that the cultural attributes of a jazz combo support this type of creativity. In other words, if I go play a jazz gig and I play it really safe and within the lines, I'll get laughed off the stage. But if I screw something up, if I take a risk and hit a clunker, hit a bad note, I just play it twice more, call it art, everything is fine. kidding aside, the culture of that organization supports each other taking these creative risks. And I think that's exactly what we need to do as business leaders if we want to gain competitive advantage and enjoy sustainable success.
So I love how you're connecting really improvisation and, taking something, repeating it, calling it art. So for someone who has founded and sold 5 companies for a combined value of over $200 million, let's expand on that. What are some of the necessary traits that something you've already said, but what are some of the necessary traits for success in your businesses?
Well, they may be less obvious. And by the way, not only have I built my own companies, but I've invested in about 100 startups. And when you think about startup success, you think of some hugely charismatic founder who's got this giant vision. And that can happen, Steve Jobs, of course, but more often than not, we look for entrepreneurs that are open-minded, that are execution-focused, that are willing to admit when they're wrong, that are humble, that have a service attitude. And that's certainly what I tried to do at each step of the way. I would say that I tried also to create rituals and rewards that supported the creative process. So at the biggest, my company, I had 500 team members. But if there was like 3 of us being creative and the rest of us just executing blindly, that would be a total fail. I think what enabled our success is that we made sure that everybody was able to leave their own creative fingerprints on the organization. We fully tapped and leveraged the full creative capacity of each team member. And when you create a safe zone where fear is out of the way and people can really get to the work of applying their inventive thinking and creative problem solving on a daily basis, that's really where the magic happens. I think if anything, we created an environment where everyday people could truly become everyday innovators.
So you talk about investing in over 100 companies, and you've given some of the qualities that you look for, but I'm curious, are there like 3 to 5 like must-need qualities or intangibles that you seek?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we try to be scientific about it when making startup investments. We looked at what we call the jockey, the horse, and the race. So the jockey is like the team or founders, the horse is the product or technology itself, and the race is the market conditions. That being said, by far, the most important thing are the people. I know it sounds like a postcard, but seriously, I've invested in great technology with B-level people and they screw it up. So it's got to be the people. But again, it's really a sense of being open-minded, being coachable. The thing that I also look for is, are you trying to solve a real problem or are you just trying to become a feature? We always say, are you selling Advil or are you selling vitamins? In other words, is it a have-to-have or nice-to-have? If someone's vision is, hey, this is a really nice thing that people might kind of want, no one's going to get up at 3 in the morning and race out to the local drugstore to get a vitamin. But if you have a burning headache and you can't sleep, you'll do whatever it takes. You'll pay whatever it costs to get an Advil. And so one of the things, are we solving a real need? Are we providing, substantially differentiated value to the end customer? And is there a way that we can really scale it way beyond the founder? Can it become really an institutional grade company?
I really appreciate that you mentioned being open-minded and being coachable, because that's so important at every level of the organization, even the CEO. So with being a tried and true entrepreneur, what strategies do you use to address, coaching or even things like handling fear with your teams, setbacks, and even failures?
Yeah, well, it's so nice of you to say. I hope I'm not a tried and true entrepreneur. And the reason I'd say that with a smile is that, when we become so committed to the old way of doing things and we rely on previous successes, I think that can be a real trap. It's funny, as I was building my companies, I had a saying, I would repeat it so much my team members got sick of me saying it. And it simply was this, that someday a company will come along and put us out of business. So it might as well be us. I try to embrace the same philosophy as a leader, that someday a leader will come and be better than me and put me out of business. So that better be me. So I try to not rely on the tried and true, but rather try to constantly push the boundaries of reinvention. To that end, though, I built what I call an operating system, 14 core principles that we don't just hang on the wall and, salute the flag, but we really live by. And some of these are pretty memorable. Of course, I list them all on my website or whatever. But, one of them is this notion of putting yourself out of business, which I just mentioned. Another one is this principle of start before you're ready, which is around taking the initiative, not waiting for a directive, not waiting until you have the perfectly mapped out game plan, but rather if you see an opportunity or a challenge, get after it, knowing full well that you may need to course correct along the way and adapt, but at least you're taking the initiative to get going. It's sort of like a don't wait kind of vibe. And then one other one is this notion of of playing like you want to be remembered. And so every email, every piece of work product, we say, okay, when our ancestors look at this and are we conveying the type of thinking that we want to, in other words, is it just a quick fix or is it something we can be proud of? And so I try to instill these values. We interview for them. We provide performance reviews based on these. And these are the kind of values that I believe will really have driven our high performance.
I love it. We're talking to Josh Linkner. I'm just curious, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, will you be the person who can put Josh out of business? We're going to talk about books and a whole bunch of other things here on The Room. We'll be right back. We're back with Josh Linkner, five-time tech entrepreneur, New York Times bestselling author, jazz guitarist, and creative troublemaker. Now, before the break, Josh, we were talking about, putting you out of business. So let's expand on that a little bit, because there's so many things happening at a global scale that there's things that we can do. So when you're talking about someone putting you out of business, are there particular traits that, you might be able to identify?
Yeah, and I think it's especially potent in these times. With the COVID crisis, the world has sort of hit the giant reset button, and patterns have been broken. Patterns in the way that we work and interact and shop and eat and love and play. And so I think it's really incumbent on us as leaders in our communities and our families even, we need to realize that we can't simply rely on the models of the past and expect the same results in a world that's changing so dramatically. So I really think it's incumbent on us to be that kind of source of disruption rather than having it thrust upon us. So I think that the characteristics that you're talking about are a couple. One of them, I love this notion of proactively breaking it to fix it. If you've been told, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think that's terrible advice. Why would you wait till something has failed? So I think it's incumbent on us to examine the systems and processes and approaches that we're using perhaps very successfully and deconstruct them and examine them and say, is there a better way? Can we give them an upgrade? Because you'd rather be the one doing the upgrading than be sort of as the outcast. Another one I think is really important is the way we look at setbacks. So just real quickly, there's a principle that I love, which is a Zen proverb called fall 7 times, stand 8. And it's not just dogged persistence, but it's rather first of all, acknowledgement that setbacks are a part of the process, but it's also the willingness to add creativity fused with resilience in order to overcome adversity and move ahead.
So what I heard you say in that was really about everyday innovations that we can, use on ourselves. And so when I look at your new book, which is out now or about to come out, Big Little Breakthroughs. Talk about how that book relates to what you're sharing right now.
Yeah, very excited about the new book, Big Little Breakthroughs, How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Results. And the whole concept is flipping what we think about innovation upside down. Too often we think that innovation only counts if it's $1 billion idea, or it only applies to certain roles. Like if you're not wearing a lab coat or a hoodie, forget about it. This is more like innovation for the rest of us, helping, again, everyday people apply the principles of innovation to the things that they care about the most. So the way it works is about, rather than swinging for the fences in these wild moonshots with irresponsible risk, it's cultivating high-frequency activities of daily creativity. So think about them as micro innovations. And when we do this, it de-risks the process. Small wins add up to big wins. You're building critical skills, and it makes it way more accessible to most everyday people like you and me to apply these skills to drive results. So it's not about drawing all over the walls with crayons. It's not about doing silly, goofy things, but it's rather harnessing human creativity to drive specific outcomes.
So obviously, one of the recurring motifs so far of the interview is really about creativity, and I would even say innovation. So if you were looking at your readers that have read any of your books, even the new book, why is it important? You've already said this a little bit, but why is it important that we become everyday innovators?
Well, as the world continues to evolve, many of the hard skills of the past have become commoditized or outsourced or automated. And I think what we need to do is look for that edge. How are we going to continue to win as organizations, but also as individuals? And the people that can embrace creative problem solving and inventive thinking, different words for creativity, are the ones that are going to get promoted and win the Jones account and figure out how to improve safety measures in a factory and drive efficiency and all the things that we care about in our professional lives. And again, many of the advantages are gone. We're now in a photo finish type outcome in many cases. And if you're looking for that edge, I really believe this can apply. But the reason I think everyday innovation is important is that it doesn't have to be giant. It doesn't have to change the world to count. In fact, a recent research report by Harvard suggests that 72% of the gross domestic product here in the United States doesn't come from the attention-grabbing SpaceX, Elon Musk, feats of greatness. It comes from normal folks doing normal things, but in high frequency. In other words, big little breakthroughs. So I think it's so important for us, if we want to remain competitive, if we want to remain relevant, if we want to remain effective in serving those around us and driving results, that we embrace this principle. In addition to our normal business card title, the secondary title should be Everyday Innovator or Everyday Artist.
This is great. I mean, this is all great information. So with this being your fourth book, how does this book build upon messaging that's already out there?
Well, the interesting thing about this, I did over 1,000 hours of research and interviews with CEOs, billionaires, celebrity entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning artists. And I really tried to take a look at the daily habits of creative people of all shapes and sizes. The other thing I think this book is fun. It's not, I don't tell the story of Netflix or Apple. We already know they're innovative. I find these really interesting examples all over the world, including fresh research from neuroscience and academic, as well as business research, and then kind of decode all of that into a very simple step-by-step process that people can apply. So I think that compared to my other books, although I do like them, it's like you want to love all your kids equally. I'm really proud of this one because I think it's fun. I think it's provocative. It's certainly grounded in a lot of research. And I think it's going to help people, again, take these critical skills and drive them into their daily lives in a really accessible and fun way.
All right. So you talked about step by step, and it's my job to really give us a little insight into your book before we all go out and get it. So what are some actionable steps that anyone, all of us, can do right now to unlock our bank of infinite creativity?
Yeah, so one thing I try to, I do a 5-minute a day little creativity warm-up, and even 5 minutes a day can make a real difference. In part of it, I spend 1 minute, just 1 minute, sort of guzzling the creativity of others. That can be watching a YouTube concert. It can be looking at a piece of art or reading a poem. So I sort of change the inputs in order to change my outputs. I then give myself some creativity jumping jacks. I'll give myself a weird creativity problem and try to solve it, not for the specific work output, but just to get my juices flowing. So I think there's a real benefit in creating habits. The other thing I'll say real quickly is that I think it's critical that we upgrade our technology. Here's what I mean. In 1958, it turns out these new technologies came on the scene. There was the Rolodex for storing your contacts, 1958. The first magnetic tape for storage, 1958. The first video game, which was like this tennis game, but you couldn't even tell because it was like this weird green screen. And this new technology came on the scene called brainstorming, which is to extract ideas. Fast forward to 2021, a lot of things have changed. We can store the entire Library of Congress on a thumb drive. We don't need magnetic tapes. You don't need a Rolodex because you got LinkedIn. Tennis games are more 3D and realistic than the real thing. Yet we're still using the same outdated technology called brainstorming. So in the book and also online, I share a whole series of far more fun and more productive brainstorming techniques that drive far better outcomes. And they're fun. One of them is called the bad idea brainstorm. One is called the judo flip. One's called invent your enemy. And so they're really challenging people to find a different spot of their creative ability in turn to drive better results.
Those are great little steps. That's awesome. All right. Earlier, you alluded at a little bit about getting insights from performers, some of those names like Banksy we've heard of, Lady Gaga, and many others. So how important is collaboration when it comes to sparking those concepts of creativity?
Well, I love to use the word spark. Often when we're in a brainstorm session and we call, our first thought an idea sort of means that it's ready for scrutiny, which young ideas are not, and they quickly get extinguished. You've probably seen this where there's 5 people in a room and one person has an idea and the other 4 become the idea police, and they shoot down the idea from every angle they can find. So I like the idea of when you're coming up with an idea jamming session to first start with sparks, because sparks are the beginnings. They're not endings. They're not ready for prime time. And often it's the idea that leads to the idea that becomes, or the spark that leads to the spark that really becomes the winner. I think collaboration can be very helpful. We often think of creativity as a lone wolf activity. Hemingway in a log cabin writing the great American novel. And there are cases of that, certainly. But more often than not, it is a collaborative process. So like when I play jazz, here's how it works. I might play an idea on the guitar, and let's say it's not that great, but it's sort of novel. But then the bass player hears that and he picks up on something I did. And then the drummer grabs a rhythm from the bass player and picks it up on a cymbal. And then the sax player hears that, takes it to the next level, rips a killer solo to the delight of the crowd. Well, whose idea was it? I mean, it was really a co-creation process. So I think that the collaborative nature of riffing off of one another actually is a very positive way to drive creativity. And you can only do that, by the way, when you create a safe condition. Fear and creativity cannot coexist. So if I'm worried what everybody else is going to do or say about my idea, it's just going to shut down my creative output.
I love how you're connecting all of this to music, creativity. All right, well, going back a little bit to the book again, if people are to put the teachings and insights from your book into action, this is a challenge, what edge can they expect to receive in their daily life?
Well, the cool thing is that creativity is a power. It's to a degree, it's a superpower, really. And, as human beings, we can't fly. We don't have X-ray vision, but we all, and I mean all of us, the research is crystal clear, can build our creative muscles. I always like to say that your creativity is like your weight, not your height. I mean, try as I may, I'm probably not going to grow 1.5 feet in the next couple months, but my weight I can control based on my behavior. And all of us truly can build creative skills. Once you have those skills developed a little bit, you can sort of aim that at just about anything that you care about. If you want to do it for personal reasons, you can aim it at being a more creative parent or partner or friend or brother or sister, or you could aim it toward your health or toward your community or your church. In the business world, though, you can really aim it toward a lot of things. You can aim it to achieving better sales outcomes. You can aim it toward driving growth. You can aim it to better serving customers and driving retention and loyalty. So I think it's first about developing the skill, and then it's sort of aiming that new skill at an outcome that you care about. So the whole notion that I have here is, again, creativity not for the sake of it. It's creativity to drive specific outcomes.
I love it. We are having a fantastic conversation with Josh Linkner, and we got to go to break. When we come back, we've got more. Stay with us on The Room. Welcome back. We're talking with Josh Linkner, 5-time tech entrepreneur, New York Times bestselling author, jazz guitarist, and creative troublemaker. Every week on The Room, we're going to ask our guests the same 5 questions. Now, Josh, as someone who has founded and invested in a multitude of companies, I hope you'll appreciate how we're trying to capture insights on specific topics. Are you ready for your 5 questions?
Let's do it, man. I'm ready.
All right. Number 1. What do you see as the biggest opportunities that businesses aren't taking advantage of in the world today?
Well, one of the things I think is really a shame is that people hire for talent and creativity and then seldom let them use it. And you see this all the time. There's a 10,000 person company and 16 people are allowed to be creative and the rest are supposed to just do what they're told. And so I think a big miss or a big opportunity, is said more nicely, is for us to really tap into the full creative horsepower of our entire team. And when an organization has every single person deploying creative problem solving and inventive thinking, I just think it creates an inherent competitive advantage. The other thing I'll quickly say, I've been long a fan of this, is, like when you buy milk in your fridge, you look at the milk, there's an expiration date on it. And that makes sense because after a while, it's just not so good anymore. Well, why don't we apply that same expiration date approach to the way we make decisions and the way we run systems and processes? In other words, why is it that when we come to a conclusion, we believe that that should be that should have permanence, that it should last forever. I mean, that would make sense if we lived in a vacuum, but today we live in a rate of change like none other in history. So whether it's the way we prospect, the way we sell, the product design, who sits on the second floor, I think all of those decisions really should have an expiration date. And look, if you get to that expiration date and it's still optimal, keep it. Don't change just for the sake of it. But on the other hand, let's just not cling to the past without at least challenging and rethinking is it really the best approach going forward?
That is such a great insight on expiration dates for ways of thinking. I love that. All right, number 2, if you could have a conversation with one person from any time or anywhere, who would it be?
Such a hard question, because there's so many amazing people. I probably would choose Charlie Parker. So Charlie Parker, for those that don't know, is this legendary jazz saxophone player who sort of took all the rules that were in place at the time and systematically broke every rule. I like to call myself a creative troublemaker, not because I want to create problems for others, but I think Charlie Parker was a good example of that. He would go and by messing with the rules and playing around, he was able to discover fresh possibility. And here we are 70 years later, still talking about him. So probably somebody like that would be fascinating to learn, how did he do it? And how did he sort of purposely deconstruct the existing structures in order to invent new ones?
Number 3, what is the one book every person in business should read and why?
Well, clearly Big Little Breakthroughs is, the primary choice for all business leaders across all of humanity. No, kidding aside. I'm a voracious reader. I just love reading constantly. Most recently, I read Adam Grant's new book, Rethink, which I think is an absolute must read. It really helps people, well, as the definition of the book says, rethink. That's the first one that comes to mind. But I think also Atomic Habits. I know you asked for one, but Atomic Habits by James Clear is a must read also. It really gets, and I think Big Little Breakthroughs, at least I tried to make it almost like the Atomic Habits for creativity, helping people build and nurture daily habits to drive better outcomes.
That's great. That's great. Number 4, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, I collect quotes a lot, and it wasn't given to me directly, but it's a great quote which I've always loved, is that chase 2 rabbits and both will escape. I've always loved that because we tend to do that. We're always after the next shiny thing as opposed to just the follow through. And by the way, I'm a creativity guy, and we think of people who are creative as like these gunslinging, wild, risky, change on a whim. And sometimes you can be very creative and still have a pretty rigorous approach. And I've always loved that one. Just one other one, which I've loved too, is by a guy named John Cage, which says that I'm not sure why people are scared of new ideas. I'm scared of the old ones. Love that.
All right. And then number 5, why is a conversation better than a lecture?
Oh, excellent question. Love that. So when we learn, think about how we interact. I mean, we don't go to a coffee with a buddy and let that person just drone on for 45 minutes while we sit there and toothpicks to keep our eyes open because we're so bored. It's interactive. And the thing is that we in the business world, we're doers. We don't just unless we were in college sitting there watching some boring lecture, we like to participate. And in fact, when people are learning and laughing and engaging, the retention is so much stronger. So when there's a conversation, when it's two-way, when you're picking up off the cues of one another, when you're adapting and responding to one another, as opposed to just reciting one's lines, it's so much more effective in terms of engagement, entertainment, and of course, long-term impact.
Such a great interaction with those 5 questions. Thank you so much. Josh, you were talking about jazz musicians, and my favorite quote from a jazz musician is Miles Davis. And you've probably heard it, but they asked him one time, they said, how do you play so well? And he said, I learned my notes, I learned my instruments, then I forgot all that stuff. Now I just wail. So thank you so much for wailing with us today and really just sharing some incredible insights. What would you like to leave us with today?
I'd just like to leave with the thought that I know many of us adults don't feel creative, but truly, we all have capacity to be creative in our own ways. I play jazz guitar pretty well. I can't draw a stick figure if I tried. So whether or not you can paint on canvas or do interpretive dance, you can find some area of your life, presumably your existing profession, where a little creativity can go a long way. And if people can allow themselves an upgrade, even a 5% upgrade, which is totally within the grasp of each of us, the results that we're craving, the desired outcomes that we want the most are within our grasp with just a little bit of creative upgrade. I strongly encourage people to pursue that.
Again, Josh Linkner, thanks so much for joining us today. Get his books, visit the website, do all those things, get involved. Thank you again, Josh, very much.
Truly a pleasure, and continue the great work that you guys are doing over at Geniecast.
Thank you. Join us next week for another engaging guest that will help you transform and inspire your team. I'm John Lanius. We'll see you next time on The Room.